All right, I'm going to run through that one more time because we're going to be discussing, not disgusting, GM.
Oh, I don't know.
It might be disgusting. All right.
Oh, that's good.
Welcome everyone to this unfiltered and only somewhat edited discussion. I am Autoblog senior producer Chris McGraw, and today I am joined by the driver of brown diesel BMW SUVs, West Coast editor James Riswick, as well as Mr. Blackwing himself, associate editor Byron Hurd. Today we're going to be discussing the best and worst of GM vehicles, cars, trucks, SUVs, and vans. But before we do, make sure to hit that subscribe button down below for more automotive content from Autoblog. We've got something for everyone: reviews, reveals, podcasts, gaming, almost everything. But for now, let's talk GM. General Motors, the company best known for its cars like the GTO, Camaro, Corvette, and Suburban, has also made some questionable decisions throughout the years. But to start things off, let's talk about current vehicles. So guys, what are your best and worst of each category of vehicle that GM currently makes?
Yeah, well, I feel like I'm kind of being set up here, but anyway, so for for best car, I'm gonna say the C8 Corvette for just like wow factor, like it's a killer automobile. It's hard to go wrong with that. Um, yeah, going down the line for truck, I'm going to go with the Colorado ZR2. It's
Okay.
kind of dark horse, it's old, it's about to be replaced, but there's stuff going on there. For SUV, Buick Enclave, which I feel like is gonna get really weird for
Wow.
everybody. Yeah. And
Wow.
then for EV, Hummer EV, it barely exists, but it doesn't catch fire yet. So I feel like that's a real upside, um, you know,
Okay.
in the grand scheme of things.
Man, I have to
So
be honest with you. I did not expect a Buick to come this early in the conversation.
coming in hot, coming in
Yeah.
hot. So yeah, you wanna take issue with any of those, or do you wanna propose alternatives
Well, I mean, I'm
first?
kind of surprised as like my first choice here is and I wasn't expecting to be able to use it because you would go first, but it's your actual car. You haven't picked
Yeah.
your own car, and
Yeah,
that
I
would
was
have been
wondering
my
about
car.
that.
No, but yeah,
Yeah.
Cadillac CT4, and I haven't even driven the Blackwing, which is what you own. And by the way, calling
Yeah.
you Mr. Blackwing makes you sound like a superhero, so that's cool.
I'm all right with that. I wish if I'd known going in that's where we were gonna head with that, I would have worn a different like color kind of scheme here and kind of owned it a little better. But yeah, no, I mean the Corvette is just it's so amazing. Like it was such a paradigm shift for GM, and one that literally everybody saw coming for how many decades, but then it finally happened and it really worked. So yeah, it's really hard to discount how amazing that car is. And yeah, it's not the one I bought, but I mean there's a difference between something being good and something being good for me. So like
Well, yeah, you're probably right. As I'm kind of picking the CT4 because I really liked it, but it is a sensational car to drive. Again, not just the Blackwing, but like the lesser version.
yeah. Oh yeah, I mean certainly not going to argue with you.
In terms of like sports sedans, I think it's the one I choose. I it is more fun to drive than the BMW 3 Series. I think it looks great. Sadly, they no longer sell it in green. But yeah, no, I love the CT4. It is and I'm not just kissing your ass here. It's a great car. I think it's the best thing that they currently make. I mean, the Corvette is great. Don't get me wrong. I think, and especially for the money, and you no longer have to say that the Corvette is so good now. I just, for the money though, would I rather have a Cayman? Probably, but I think that either of those are just fantastic. In terms of other segments, the truck thing's tough because um, the heavy duty ones, the Chevys, are hideous, and
Yeah,
we all
they're
know
butt
that
ugly.
the trucks are going to be redesigned in terms of their interiors, which was the number one reason they were not competitive for the segment. Um, but we haven't seen them yet in person, so I don't know. I guess whatever the future, the Silverado High Country with the new interior. Let's go with that. SUVs. Um, the Tahoe and the Yukon, they are so much better now. And, you have that diesel engine in them, and they now get best in class fuel economy while still like having just as much or more torque. I don't entirely remember. And by the way, if we say anything that's factually incorrect here, we're doing our best. We're not GM historians, and there's only so many windows I can have up on my computer at any given time.
This is facts.
But yeah, it's extremely competitive. I think it's the best thing in the class now. So I'm going to have to go with the Chevy.
I know. I just got out of a Yukon AT4, and I drove that like to Vail and back. And man, that interior is so much better than anything that I've personally seen from GM in a long time. That I was very impressed with that. Yeah.
Yeah, and it has the new Android Automotive tech interface for 22. The old one was actually fine, but it does have that new thing. And then EVs, I'm going to go with the one that catches fire, or could, the Bolt, because the Hummer is so far away. It's gonna come out in stages. So yeah, they'll be the first edition, but the ones that are cheaper will be so far away. It's like they don't really exist. So I'm going to say the Bolt, because maybe not just like right in this moment, but it was so beyond everything else. Like the amount of range you got from that car just massively leapfrogged anything that was remotely like similar in price. And although the body style they completely whiffed on in terms of something that people would actually want to buy, it still counts for a lot, because that is a very impressive vehicle, and it deserves a lot more attention than it gets, because the body style hurt it, but from a technical standpoint, it's a great achievement, even if the battery supplier really let them down.
Yeah, and honestly, like, if they'd gone Bolt EUV first and just offered either front or all-wheel drive in what was already basically a more realistic crossover, then they probably wouldn't have had the sales struggles that they had with it. At the same time, like, yeah, it is really good. I genuinely loved it. It's just, it's hard to call it best under the circumstances at the moment. I mean, considering, they can't even sell them. So it's not a great look.
Well, enough with the best. Let's talk worst.
I would love to hear.
Yeah, let's flip it around. Let's talk worst of their current vehicles. I know, like, worst looking for me is the heavy duty Chevy pickups, but what do you guys think worst of the GM lineup right now?
So I'm gonna get yelled at for this one too. Worst car, I went with the Camaro, which I know that poor Camaro. Worst truck, I went with the Canyon, which is kind of funny because right across the street from the Colorado, but it's that's fine. SUV, this is a narrow. I went Trax because whatever we call these things, and then I mean EV both of the Bolts, because they do catch fire. Like, I'm just trying to be consistent here. Like, I'm like, it's not like there's a large pool to choose from when it comes to EV. It is
right.
I mean, if the Hummer doesn't exist, then it can't be the worst one either, right? So, like, I could say EV1, I guess, but that's certainly not current.
Well, cars. I mean, what do they have? The Malibu, like that's they don't make that anymore. So I guess you're stuck with the Camaro, and that has had issues for a very long time. It just doesn't connect with people. They had someone at GM thought the flow tie front end was a good idea, and they walked that back quickly.
Yes.
It's just not as good as it's too very high muscular bro. It's just not. It doesn't have wide enough appeal, I think, ultimately. Even though even though from a driving perspective, it's the best in the segment. It is fantastic, but perhaps they focused a little too much on that. My overall worst is the Chevy Equinox. Although because the Chevy Express is a van that's been made since the mid-90s and objectively is the worst, I'm going to say the Equinox because it doesn't approach the class leaders in any way. Interior space, average, but well below the segment leaders. Interior quality and design, below average. Power fuel economy, below average. Driving experience, deadly dull. Like the Blazer. And then there's just the way it looks. It's just, it's been kind of tweaked for 22, but it's just this amorphous blob of a thing. It was Chevy's design language at the time, but I mean, we're talking about like the Volt and the Malibu, and it did not translate to this amorphous blob of an SUV. And it is just a sad-looking car, especially compared to everything that it competes with, which is like CRVs and RAV4s, for goodness sake, yet it's just kind of sad and blobby. And again, they have the Blazer, they have the Trailblazer, so they've definitely course-corrected since then, so that's a good thing. Which they're better to drive, too. So there's finally a little more brand cohesion there for Chevrolet. Here's the other thing. Compact SUVs are the most important segment outside full-size trucks. So they don't really have, I'm sure plenty of people buy them because they have a Chevy dealer in their town, but it's just not a competitive product at the moment. But I will say, the fact that I think this is the worst thing they sell at the moment-ish, is very telling because the past would have been a lot more to choose from. The bar is so much higher than it had been in, say, the 2000s. That's ultimately a good thing. And trucks. The current Silverado, they need to redo the interior, and they did. So great. And then the EV, the thing that's could catch on fire due to the batteries. That's not great.
So wait a minute, your best EV and your worst EV are the same thing?
Yeah, they only sell one, dude. what do you want from me?
Well, I mean, we could talk upcoming, I guess, if we need more than.
The best is the EUV. The worst is the EV. There you go.
Okay.
Go.
Okay. All
That's
right,
fair.
I'm with you now.
That works.
Yeah.
Yeah, honestly, and I agree with you on Equinox because honestly, I was going back and forth between the two. Like I was, trying to think of like where they have like egregiously bad SUVs, and they really don't. It's really honestly what did it for me for Trax was just the styling is just so unbelievably dorky. I apologize to anyone watching, listening to, reading a transcript of anything we're saying right now. If you own a Trax, I'm sorry. I really am.
Yeah, I think the Trax is appealing to people who want the lowest lease payment of all time. I think that's probably where that ends. All right. Well, it's safe to say we've probably driven more cars than the average person. Do you guys have like favorite and least favorite GM cars that you've driven to date? I can go first on this one. My favorite GM car that I've driven to date, I think, is going to be the CTS-V wagon. Before I started my job here, I was working for a film production company who actually was hired to do the V Academy video out at Spring Mountain. So I spent like a week just driving V wagons around, getting cool shots with really expensive cameras. So that was the best for me. And then I think the worst for me, probably my college ex-girlfriend's Buick Skylark. But that might have, not just be the car, but the memories that come along with that. But how do you guys feel? What's your favorite that you've driven to date?
Well, I guess unlike Byron, I believe almost the entirety of my GM driving experience has been like in a professional capacity, like driven cars since like 2006. And so within that time frame, I'm going to keep it to there. And I was tempted by the Pontiac G8. That was a really cool car. It had a lot of. It was from Australia, so it had a lot of like wacky pants interior stuff, which made it kind of interesting and charming, yet also bad. But it looked fantastic. It was fantastic to drive too. C7 Vet, again, you mentioned that the CTS, or actually no, the last CTSV, that thing was great. But I'm going to say the original Chevy Volt is the best that I've driven because of just how significant it was. Not unlike the Bolt, but how much of a technical achievement it was. It was a plug-in hybrid. They called it any number of marketing things, but that's what it was. It was a plug-in hybrid, way ahead of everything else, and it was such a solid concept. It was revolutionary, not just for GM, but for the entire industry. And yeah, it only had 2 back seats, and the ones that were there were cramped, and the aero dam on the front scraped on everything. Everything. It's molehill, everything. It scraped on everything. And yeah, it wasn't as cool as the concept car. But it was a terrific city car. I drove it. Back in the old days, we had one as a long-termer, and I drove it constantly in LA traffic, and it was fantastic. It had 1 pedal driving. It was pretty quick with that electric motor. It had that low center of gravity. That the battery ran down the center of the car in like a T fashion, so you had it literally low and in the center of the car, really grounded. It was surprisingly fun to drive. Really kind of cool interior controls, touch capacitive, which were but at the time pretty neat. Had the white kind of iMac center console.
Oh man, yeah.
And I drove it a lot. I love that car, and because it was a plug-in hybrid, you could actually take it on a road trip. It was pretty comfortable and decent, trunk space. It's a really cool car. I think it just I hope it gets remembered for being, maybe it didn't end up being a big seller. Maybe it wasn't as important in the long run, but at the time it was a big deal, and I think it was a pretty big achievement, and GM at its best.
Yeah, living in Detroit at the time, I saw those things everywhere. I now realize that my little, tri-county Detroit area was not representative of how the United States buys vehicles. Now that I live out of state, and people are, not hating me for driving Subarus and Toyotas, but
a lot more Pontiac G6s per capita there than otherwise.
At least 2 of my best friends.
derivatives.
Yeah. Oh yes, yeah. Did you ever drive the Cadillac version? I can't remember what the Cadillac version of the Volt was
ELR?
called.
I did.
What did you think of that one?
Oh, well, interesting, because that thing was actually really good too. It was mechanically the same thing. It had this lovely interior. It looked pretty cool, but the price was hilarious. It was announced, and we all laughed. We laughed because it was so outrageously, insanely expensive that we thought they were kidding.
Well, that was the one that actually Cadillac offered I don't know if they called it a performance package, but a sport package for that one that actually had a sport tuned suspension and stuff too, if I remember right. I think it was maybe later in life, near when they canceled it, but I think that happened.
I liked it, but as a consumer product, it was nonsense because of the price. It might as well have just been price $ bajillion gillion. It didn't matter. It was so stupid.
Right.
Don't buy.
Oh, and they actually retuned the powertrain too. So it wasn't just that it handled better, but it actually got more punch, which did reduce its total range.
How long was that on the market?
Not very long.
Yeah,
it could have been years, 3 months. It could have been 8 years, but we just stopped paying attention to it. But it didn't matter.
Yeah. All right, Byron, what do you got for your favorite?
So this is just throwing another wrench this time. Of the ones I've actually driven, I'm actually going to go with the CT5V Blackwing, and and again, this is getting weird because I have driven the C8, and obviously I've driven the CT5V too, and the CT5V Blackwing, the supercharged V8 in that thing, there's such a sense of occasion with that car, and honestly, the only reason there are 2 reasons why I chose the CT4V over CT5V. First of all, it's cheaper. Openly acknowledging that it is you're talking about $20,000 to $25,000 difference once you actually load them up and start playing around with stuff. Also, I come from basically having 2 big V8 American cars almost in a row over the past few years, and so I was just ready for small again. But the CT5V Blackwing is not really that big. It's not really that heavy. It's only like 200 pounds more than the CT4V, and it sounds amazing. Everything about it is just so much, but it's just like it's 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 impressive. It's a show, but like, where would I ever use it? I mean, it's not like the 4 is so underpowered that I can it's not like a Miata, but at the same time, like, what makes the 5 so much better than the 4 doesn't make it any better for what I'm gonna do with it. Like, I'm gonna track it, I'm gonna autocross it, but the V8 doesn't necessarily make it any better at either of those things. It just makes it more fun the rest of the time when it's making noise. And I've done the V8 noise thing, so I'm moving on. But I just still I appreciate it for what it is. It is one of the most impressive products GM's ever put together, and certainly top 3 for the ones I've driven of theirs all time, with the C8 and the 4 being the others that I would throw in there.
How about worst?
uh, so okay, a couple years back, when the pandemic started, I decided I was going to go stay with my parents in New Mexico for a couple months, and I did a one-way rental. So I rented a then new-ish, it was a 2020, I believe, Chevy Malibu from Enterprise. And while it was an incredibly competent car, it was still an Enterprise rental car in the middle of the pandemic, which meant it had, I don't even remember how many miles were on it. I don't think I've driven a rental car that's ever had more than about 7,500 miles on it before in my life. This one had well in excess of 10,000. It had, by rental standards, one of the longest lives of a car you would find for rent in the domestic fleets from a real rental company. Not like just, Jack's down the road, but a national chain that, it smelled, it made me sick driving it. Like, I actually had, my sinuses were getting inflamed by whatever was traveling through the vents and the HVAC in that car. It was terrible, but it got me there. Mechanically, everything about it was great, but it just reminded me how poorly those cars wear when they're not taken care of. Because that's what, any car is going to suffer from neglect, right? But not all cars are equally hard wearing. And I'll tell you, 2020 Chevy Malibu is not a hard wearing vehicle.
So your worst was not just a general year make model; it was literally a car.
that particular car.
Number associated with your choice.
The license plate was
Yeah, that one actually it did legitimately have some problems with it, though. The electrical system just quit on me at one point when I was cruising through a small town in New Mexico. 30-mile-an-hour speed limit. It wasn't a big deal, but literally just everything in the car just turned off. The engine was still running, but the transmission stopped responding to anything. So I just had to ease it off the side of the road, shut it off, turn it back on, and like any good router, it was back and ready to roll. But that was an interesting experience.
Yeah. I mean, shoot, just driving from, where were you at, Ohio at that point, down to New Mexico?
I was in Detroit at that point.
Oh, okay,
so yeah.
Detroit to New Mexico. That, in and of itself, would be an interesting experience. I don't think I'd want to do it in a Malibu.
Could have been worse, but...
If we're going with specific cars, there was a long-term Saturn Aurora that spent almost 2 months in the shop for various maladies. That was a piece of junk. Yeah, I have a deep well of turd sandwiches over the years, entirely from the 2000s. That was not a good era. There was a Pontiac Solstice coupe. Oh, not good. The Cadillac XLR, I remember getting in that, and just everything was kind of rickety and really oddly confining and uncomfortably claustrophobic inside. The Buick LaCrosse, the first one, was such a nondescript, ugly, uncompetitive parts bin special. The Chevy Cobalt XFE. But ultimately, I am going with the Hummer H2 SUT, the truck.
Oh, yeah.
Now, yes, it was appallingly fuel inefficient. How inefficient, we don't know. It was a heavy-duty truck, so they didn't actually have to report fuel economy. yes, it was offensively enormous and clogged parking lots and the views of mountains, etc. But here's the other thing: it was not good. It was just objectively not a very good or useful vehicle. It was the size of a house on the outside, but inside it wasn't like big at all.
Yeah.
I sat in the back seat of one, and I was like this in the back seat. It had no space to speak of. Um, the truck. I'm talking about the SUT because the regular one was also all of what I'm saying, but the SUT in particular, the bed on that was wider than it was long. Think about that for a second. Um, it wasn't even 3 feet long, and yeah, it had the avalanche mid-gate thing, but I mean, really. So it was, as a truck, kind of useless. It was also slow. Like, we're talking about 0 to 60 in the tens. Even though it had all of the V8 engine in it, it was just ponderous to drive everywhere. I think at the time, like we did our test driver did like a slalom in it, and he almost went as fast backwards as forwards because he did try that. Visibility, terrible visibility. Interior quality, because it was a 2000s GM product, was not good for the money or period. So yeah, it could have gotten 50 miles per gallon, and it still would have been just bad. So I will pee on that. And I will say I never drove an Aztec, so I definitely sat in one at a dealership, but I don't think it was as bad as any of those.
Yeah, I never got even anywhere near to an Aztec at all ever. I think the worst I've been in the 2000s was a Rendezvous, but we could go on and on. So the three of us were children of the 80s, though I don't really recall any of it because I was only 4.5 months old when 1990 came around. That being said, 1980s GM cars kind of played a fairly big role in my life early on. I called my parents actually like an hour ago, and they couldn't tell me for certain, but there were one of three cars that I was brought home from the hospital in as a newborn in 1989. It was either a 1988 Chevy Corsica, metallic gray with red striping. That red striping, I'm sure, made it look so great. Or a 1985 red and gray Pontiac Grand Am, which I think was the first year after they brought it back. Or it was a 1985 red and white Chevy maxi van. I don't remember the Grand Am at all from my childhood, though I do have some memory of the van and the Corsica. What are your guys' first experiences in a GM car? I know, yeah, this will be interesting.
Oh, well, I mean, yeah, I was brought home from the hospital in an '83, 81 Buick LeSabre. So
Okay.
that's a big black, Malaise era sedan. And then shortly, but at the time, my dad had an '83 Oldsmobile Cutlass Sierra, which was a new car at the time, a car that my mom would later get. Um, but those are the last two GM cars they would own.
Yeah, same here. Yeah, those three were the last three GM cars
I
my
don't think
parents
they were
owned as well.
particularly bad, but Dad went to Jeep for a couple of for 4 years, and then never went back again to that either. But my family like had them all into all throughout the '80s, with the exception of a couple of aunts and uncles who had Ford Tempos. Oops. Um, so yeah, early on, and actually, it was funny because got to drive a Buick Grand National, maybe like 10 years ago, and that was like a cool car. But I thought it was cool because it was like stepping back in time to my childhood. Because like really, the interior of the Regal, it's a Regal, was basically the same as all those cars I grew up with, and I knew how to use the radio with the little four chiclet buttons that if you press more than one, it was a different radio preset entirely. Um, so yeah, from this era, I would say I'm quite familiar with mundane cars. You said '85 Grand Am, so
Yes.
in 1980, well, after 85, my grandmother asks me, "What kind of car should I get, James?" And I go, you should get a red Pontiac Grand Am. And she bought a red Pontiac Grand Am. Bam. I've been
Wow.
dispensing automotive advice since I was 3 years old.
Okay. How about you, Byron?
So my family was all that they had a bunch of imports, honestly. Like my parents had Toyota Tercels, VW Rabbits. Um, I think the first exposure I had to GM on any like real basis was my best friend growing up back in Maryland. His parents had an old custom cruiser with the rear facing seats in the tailgate and everything. Oh
Yeah.
my god. Big old wagon. It was, cream with the woody treatment. It was like stereotypical. Oh my god. And that was great because, we're 6, 7 years old. So this actually, it would have been in the 90s, but it was an 80s vehicle. And, they're taking us to the pool in the community and stuff like that. So we loved it because they would just throw us in the back with the towels and be like, don't get anything wet. And we, flip down the thing and put the towels out on it and just kind of, and then occasionally they would forget that they hadn't put the seats in the back and they'd just be like, we're not going that far. You'll be fine. So, but yeah, that was really it. It wasn't until I actually started doing this that I got to get out and actually experience more GM vehicles because just nobody I was around when I was younger really had them.
Do you guys have like favorites and least favorites from the 80s and the 90s?
Oh yeah. So I kind of wanted to pick the Oldsmobile Cutlass Supreme Coupe, like from like '88, because I still think that was like pretty cool. It had the blackout B and C pillars on it, which was kind of a thing for GM at the time. But it actually got a little better looking in the '90s, and it also got more powerful because it only had like 130 horsepower. So let's move that aside. So I'm going to go with, because forgive my Canadian pronunciation here, but the Camaro IROC Z, because I think that's cool. I know it has like the whiff of mullet about it, but I don't care. I still think that looks pretty distinctive, and yeah, I mean if you look, it actually had some muscle to it for the time. If you look at how much power it actually have, it's like a Subaru Forester like today. But
Yeah.
I think that thing's cool. I drive that. I don't know if either of you watched The Americans, but like that car,
Yep.
it wasn't the IROC Z, but it was like the other, like an earlier Camaro where Philip, the Russian spy, he wants to buy an American car, and that was the cool thing that he wanted. I totally agree. It was very cool. I like that thing. I think it deserves a comeback in terms. I think we should retro the '80s. And that thing, make Camaro different. The next one should reference that one.
Yeah, I'm here for that. Go back to IROC over Z28. That'll be fun. This is another weird one, but I guess that's just where I'm rolling today. So I'm actually going to go for best of the 80s being the Fiero, and I know it's another one that's not objectively good, right? It's not objectively good, but it's a nice relic of when GM tried. Like and that sounds terrible now because they're obviously like things have changed in the last decade, especially. But when you look at the 80s, like there was, they were coming off malaise, and they were just finally like, which is going to tie into my least favorite car, GM from the 80s. But like you have this like the sense that they're trying things, and I think that was when GM was still like investing in like aerospace companies and all the other crazy crap that domestics were doing in the 80s, where they're like, yeah, we're diversifying, we're doing new things. Certainly hasn't been repeated in any way in modern automotive manufacturing, right? We're not getting into technology or software or anything weird like that. Why would we? But like they were doing weird things with the cars back then, and the Fiero was kind of the last where like they're going to throw it to the wall and see if it sticks. And then, by the time it got killed off, it actually was halfway decent. And the next generation of it could have been good. I mean, we could have gotten to like a mid-engine GM sports car that was worth a damn way before we actually did, 2 years ago. So, hey, it I know it's, most people know Fiero because it was a junker on How I Met Your Mother, but like for a lot of us, it was just like, hey, they did something, they tried, they really did. And then for another 10 years, it was just, well, let's start throwing SS badges on stuff and see if it works. So, I like to kind of recognize that little bit of effort actually went into doing something different.
So what was your worst then? You said there's a tie in there.
I'm gonna go with the front wheel drive Cadillac Fleetwood, the downsized Fleetwood, the like post malaise leftover Fleetwood, the oh my god, we can't keep doing this, but it's already paid for, so let's keep selling them until no one buys them anymore. Fleetwood.
That was the first
So
Cadillac I ever went in. My Aunt Lorna had one. She loved that thing. Silver. So she after the Black LeSabre that my family sold to them, she got that. So that was the first Cadillac I had been in.
Is that your worst one too, James? Or?
No. There's a far deeper.
Is it the Fiero?
Far deeper turd iceberg from Cadillac to sample from in the '80s, and that would be the Cimarron. I mean, that is the correct answer. It is.
I thought it was too easy.
Yeah, but sometimes the easy answer is the correct one. Let's take an '80s Cavalier. And of course it was the '80s because what other decade they couldn't easily pull the '90s Cavalier in 1980 something. But anyway, it was unacceptable. It was unacceptable at the time. It was unacceptable thereafter. Just an embarrassing vehicle. You still see them up until a while ago for someone's grandmother who bought one because that was what she could afford. And they'll show up in Palm Springs used car sales and they're just like immaculate. But
yeah,
just embarrassing.
There have to be at least a few of those still around here too. I haven't seen any of them, surprisingly, since I moved here.
I mean, really, often than not, the worst of GM is badge engineering at its worst. And this is an era of that too. Like, is that a Buick? Is it an Oldsmobile? I don't know. Like, talk about those wagons you were talking about. They're like indistinguishable.
Yes.
But like. Really? You're going to pull Cadillac into this now? Okay. Yeah, did not. I mean, it hurt Cadillac for a long time. But then you also have like that same IROC Z Camaro a couple years earlier was introduced as that same generation Camaro Sport Coupe, which had the 90 horsepower Iron Duke 4-cylinder, which. Yeah, 90 horsepower. This is not like the 4-cylinder turbo of Camaro today. No. That's a rather sad moment. I found apparently 12% of owners of the '82 Camaro chose the Iron Duke versus 51% which got the V8. So thank God. And then also Oldsmobile diesels. That set back diesel in this country for forever until Volkswagen really finished it off.
Yeah, right?
Yeah, I was going to say diesel has not made a comeback in this country. So, yeah. What about the 90s? I don't have any all my experience with GM cars was like 80s and then now since I've, started driving them for work, I don't have any experience in 1990s GMs.
I think the 90s were a great era for GM, especially in terms of design. Like, if you look at the cars, you're like, it's hard to see how they in any way competed with the a Camry or Accords, like those things, just because like they were always like a different size and they were just going for different stuff. So it was kind of, I would have hated to do a comparison test then because it would, or maybe it would have been interesting. I don't know. But I'm going to say for the best was the Oldsmobile Aurora. Because, yes, I do have a model of this thing.
Wow.
Yeah, from the Indy 500. I lived in Indianapolis at that time. My father owned this car. It was pretty much because I begged and pleaded him to get one. Because I thought it was the coolest damn thing. It was new, it was different, it was futuristic. And it was an attempt, albeit ultimately a fleeting one, to actually make Oldsmobile unique and coherent. Because if you look at what they were selling just 2 years before, it is like just the pulling off the shelf badge engineering stuff. They were all over the place, and this kind of signaled that it was going to be new. I mean, it didn't even have Oldsmobile written on the car except for the radio faceplate. But besides having like the ultimate like melting soap super 90s look to it, I still think it looks neat. And maybe I'm just so a child of the '90s that I'm just indoctrinated, but I still think it looks great. The interior was really cool. Like it wrapped around the driver to like an absurd degree. Like the passenger control for the passenger had their own temperature control in the door because everything was just moved over away from them. That's actually it's not quite like the C8 Corvette, but it was kind of close. Just a lot of really cool, unique things in that car that weren't like spread around. It was most related to the Buick Riviera at the time, which was also kind of neat, but it wasn't like in any way like anything else. 4-liter North Star V8 had a lot of power, front wheel drive, so yeah. But yeah, it's comfortable. I sat in the back seat a lot in that car going on family vacations down to Florida. And, my dad, I think to this day says it's like his favorite car he's ever had. So, and it looked great in purple. Looked great in purple, which he had. It was like the color of wine. Beautiful. They had 2 purple colors. They had a purple one and then like a burgundy, and they had the burgundy. Gorgeous. Gold package too. And on that car, there was very little. Man. There was only the badge and the word Aurora on the back. So right. It wasn't like a Lexus. It was actually kind of complimentary. So yeah, that's the best because I have the model. So.
What's the worst?
Ooh, this is hard. Now I actually asked for some feedback from some friends who had owned them, and there was a lot of recommendations for Cavalier, the first Lumina, the Corsica, the Beretta. But all of that was based on them like falling apart and being terrible thereafter. So I was like, I mean, I didn't have that personal experience. I think I kind of have to. We're automotive journalists. We only have to worry about what it's like new, and thereafter you're on your own, man. So I'm going to go with the Oldsmobile Sierra because it actually was made in 95 and 96, the first years of the Aurora. They were selling this at the same time as that thing, which dated back to 1982. I already said I was taken home from the hospital in the Sierra. I was born in 83. So, like, yeah, there was like a pretty major refresh in like 89, but effectively it was the same car. Look at the interior of the thing. It is the same as the 80s. So they were selling a car that was old at the beginning of the 90s into the middle of the decade. So, like, you could say it was like, I'm not sure you can really say it wasn't competitive because no one sold anything remotely similar to this thing by that time. I mean, just because they also had the Cutlass Supreme as a mid-size sedan, and I guess the Olds Achieva was a compact. It clearly people were buying them because they just kept trotting them out, and maybe they were actually better made than the Corsicas and the other things and the Lumina, and that's why they could keep making them because also the Buick Century, same car. So I think just for the lack of them continuing to trot out a fossil for so long is why that was the worst of the 90s.
All right, Byron, best worst of the 90s for you.
All right, so best is tough, and honestly, it's like James said, like there are really a lot of good choices in that, and I actually wrote down 3 different ones. So I'm actually gonna go ahead and commit to the C4 Corvette because it's a super cool and underappreciated Corvette. By that point, the C4 Corvette wasn't a complete joke anymore. Like, it was really only a joke because it was way underpowered when it was first introduced in the 80s, and then by the mid 90s when it was kind of phasing out, it actually had gotten pretty good, and then we got this cool Lotus engineered overhead cam V8, like super awesome car. They're actually still like reasonably affordable too. Like as far as like, collectible Corvettes go, you can still get one. At least you could before the pandemic. You could get them for less than 20 grand, which is thoroughly reasonable for what's going to be a highly collectible car one day. Now they're probably more than that, but still, I mean, it's a really interesting Corvette. Until, well, we'll see what happens over the next couple of years, but the idea of overhead cam V8s and Corvettes is just never really panned out all that well. So, and of course, it spawned a very successful kind of sub brand for Corvette, which had some staying power. Pretty cool car. The others that I put down were the GMC Cyclone, which just barely made the cut because that was a '91. And I mean, now that fast trucks are all big, heavy fast trucks, it's kind of nice to look back, with the exception of like Ranger Raptor. It's cool to look back at like truly compact, like fun, sporty trucks. And then of course Typhoon after that. So I mean, those are pretty cool. But I wanted to recognize Firebird kind of in the same way that you wanted to recognize IROC, like the Trans Ams there near the end, like when that generation of F body was on its way out, up until around like the turn of the century. Man, we got some wild looking Firebirds, and they were. I mean, I had friends who built them and loved them. They're
So
F body reliability.
So you're talking about not the one that was crapped in the '80s, the one that was in the '90s.
Yeah.
Whatever is that 4th gen? Yeah, 4th.
Yeah, that should be 4th gen F body. Yeah.
Oh, the one with like the four nostrils on the front.
Absolutely. Yes.
S6.
Yeah, that was. I think those were maybe like 99, 2000, 2001, if I'm remembering right. But yes, oh man, like they're wild looking. You don't see too many of them left today. They're they're crazy. Again, this was just like you said, there's so many different choices, because I mean, C5 Corvette was introduced in the '90s. There's so many like you have a lot of options. Like they weren't necessarily doing anything particularly innovative in some of these spaces by this point. Like it was just like, well, we know how to make a solid axle pony car go real freaking fast in a straight line, and let's make it look crazy doing it. Like it there was nothing groundbreaking about it, but they were cool, and they were '90s cool. That over the top, overly plasticky, can't say words, like just like like a desktop PC painted green and flying down the highway, just as much plastic as you can load on it. Like that was like 1998 in a nutshell.
I think that 4th gen Camaro, when that came out, I still think that looks pretty good. Like when it had like the teeny tiny the headlights. That looked like that couldn't have been any more powerful than your common household flashlight. They were so small. And then they ruined it. They put like a big old like Chrysler Concorde, like lower plastic grille on the front. It had the big blobby headlights, maybe because the old ones weren't good. But either way, they kind of ruined it. I never thought that thing looked good again. And again, you gotta. I never heard a lot of good things about that car dynamically. But in terms of like them going for something that was like completely different and kind of outlandish, and good for them, because those cars were absolutely that. For as kind of, they did sell a lot of them, but for them being kind of out there, that's kind of cool. I mean, compared to like the Mustang at the time, like consider how like both today's Camaro and Mustang are kind of, both retro, of the same era. But those two were of the '90s. The Mustang and the Camaro were completely different in appearance and overall vibe. And again, that would have been a fun comparison test.
Yeah. Well, and even since, I mean, at the time, both of them were live axle cars, but you figure that like the Mustang was still like the more track oriented dynamic car. Like it was supposed to be the handler of the two, really, because you look at it, it wasn't until they started messing around with like Terminator, like supercharged Cobras and stuff like that, that they were actually taking down GM in a straight line, even though both of them were V8 based. So like you have to figure, that the Mustang is the one that got an IRS engineered for it for the Cobra. Like that was their thing, was let's go around road courses, and GM was like, fine, we'll take straight lines, and it worked for them because small block V8 can't go wrong, and Ford had to come back with supercharging to get them, so that was kind of golden age for going fast in a straight line.
What's your least favorite of the '90s? And then I'm going to hit you guys with some questions that you aren't as prepared for.
Well, I wanted to bash on the Malibu again, but then I realized that super bland late '90s Malibu wouldn't have been possible without the intervening vehicle, which is the Chevy Celebrity. And the Chevy Celebrity was so uninteresting to anybody after its decade and a half or however long it ran, that they just didn't bother. They were like, "Oh, let's just do Malibu again," because that hasn't worked. So, because there was a Malibu, and then there wasn't a Malibu, and then we got Celebrity, and then they killed Celebrity because it didn't go anywhere, and then we got Lumina, and then we got Malibu back. So they were, like that's like 3 revisions ago, essentially, if you look at Celebrity. So that's because, I
Celebrity,
mean,
the Celebrity ended in '90. That was, I think you're on the border here.
well, I mean, it is what you got, because like from that, I mean, do we want to say it's all of them collectively? The Celebrity, the Lumina, and the Malibu are all terrible? Because realistically,
Yeah, actually, the Celebrity, speaking of, it's the Cutlass Sierra. It's the same damn thing. We picked the same car.
Man, so many were just rebadging after rebadging. So now we're going to talk about vans a little bit. I just threw you guys 3 Duravans. They're concept sketches that let me see if I can let me give this guy some credit, at wb.artist20 made. So we're talking about if they made the A-Team van today. That's what this first one is. The other 2, one we have a Chevy Astro van concept, and the third one is an Escalade. It's basically an Escalade-based caddy van. And so my question to you is, if you could bring back and see one of these brought to production, because there wasn't really a caddy van like that, if you could see one of these brought to production, the GMC Vandura, aka the A-Team van, the Chevy Astro van, or the Cadillac Escalade-inspired caddy van, which one would you choose?
I mean, the Cadillac is. Oh, look at the front door. Oh no.
yeah.
Where does the engine go?
Where do your legs go to get out? I mean, that's worse than that's like Sprinter or Transit van levels of awkward egress. Like, you'd have to turn your entire body sideways and then step out with your left leg and then follow it with your right, kind of slide down.
Oh no, it's also kind of Japanese looking, like one of those like high ace like Japanese
Yeah.
market vans. Actually, they probably love it in Japan for that very reason.
I think I actually like the nose of the Cadillac. I think might actually be my favorite of the 3. It's just everything behind it that gets really scary.
It's no more ridiculous than the Escalade. I mean, it's the same. It is
It's the same as the Escalade, yeah.
But yeah.
I mean, I guess if they're electric, then it doesn't matter where we stick the nose, except for how you get in and out of the vehicle. That is a challenge with some of these.
One is probably the most like coherent, looks kind of realistic of them all. The Chevy, personally, I would have gone with the HD front end on that to really bring it home.
Yeah.
I think because just for the humor, I would want to see the Cadillac, but I think the GMC is probably the one that I could see most working. And honestly, maybe like the Sienna Woodland, which is the like the outdoorsy version of the Toyota Sienna without actually really offering much of an improvement at all. Maybe if they did sell something like that, maybe that could. People would like that more than an Acadia.
All right, now in honor of the Hummer, which we've mentioned a couple times, the H2 and the EV, which existing or past GM car would you want to see, buy, or drive as an EV the most?
Ooh. Oh, so you're talking about like a retro mod?
It could be a retro mod. It could be something they make now, but just in an EV form. Which would you want to drive the most?
Oh, like late '60s Olds Toronado, or like actually any of those 3 related cars. Late '60s Olds Toronado, Buick Riviera and Cadillac Eldorado. Those are some of my favorite cars of all time. They are like very cool from their design, and they're gigantic. So sure, I'm sure they could fit in lots of batteries in them. That would be my choice because I'm all about EV retro mods of giant old personal luxury coupes.
Okay. Byron?
I'm going to cheat. I'm going to say the Cadillac 16, which was never actually built. And the entire point of it was that it had a V16. So this would literally, defeat the purpose. But if we're going to call it like, I don't know, the Cadillac 48, because it has a 48-volt electrical system or some crap like that, just imagine how much battery you could fit in the front of that car if you wanted to. And it might not weigh that much more than the engine they stuck in there. And I mean, again, for the same reasons, I mean, all that wheelbase, it would be the ultimate, just like huge EV luxury coupe. And I think it would, I mean, it needs some work to look modern, but it wouldn't take that much.
El Mirage too.
Ooh.
That would be that. I just popped that photo in there. I mean that car is spectacular. That like, can you imagine if they sold that as an EV? Like, they're not going to sell that many of them, but you could sell for 150 grand or something. That's a cool car. Like, people would like to be seen in that. That's a halo car that could both really establish Cadillac as a thing, which is what we always said all along with that beautiful thing, with that beautiful car. But then making an EV somehow. That's probably completely unrealistic from a packaging perspective, but
All right, finally, if you could bring back any GM brand, but one of the current ones has to go, would you do it? And if you would, which one would you revive and which one would you kill off?
Oldsmobile. I just bring back Oldsmobile. I mentioned it enough here.
You have mentioned Oldsmobile. I didn't think we'd talk so much Oldsmobile today. I'm kind of surprised at that.
It's surprisingly charming through the years. I think we've attempted, like, a lot of our editors have owned them, grew up with them. John Snyder's like grandfather was like
ran it, right?
Yeah, like, so we're basically Oldsmoblog here.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'd bring back Oldsmobile, and we don't need, actually, I think the least coherent brand is Chevrolet, honestly, but I'd probably get rid of Buick. We don't need another premium adjacent luxury thing. Focus on Cadillac.
I would be surprised if you two chose anything other than Buick to get rid of, honestly.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah.
I mean,
actually, you get rid of GMC too, because like if they sell the same thing, apart from the Acadia, and the terrain is basically equal. The Acadia is one of the most distinctive vehicles. Yeah.
All right, Byron, what would you bring back and what would you get rid of?
I'd bring back Pontiac and kill Buick. Yeah.
Okay.
I feel like I was burning, like everything was kind of leading to that question. Really, if you look at some of the things I'd already chosen here, that was kind of inevitable.
Pontiac was such a shame because there was like everyone like we all liked the idea of Pontiac. We kind of got what the brand should be, and I think that was kind of distilled in that G8, even though they took it from Australia. But the reality was like ribbed plastic body cladding and the Pontiac G3, and just like they couldn't help themselves about actually creating a coherent brand where like, we're going to be the performance oriented but not luxury brand. Okay, that's a thing. We've kind of seen there are those that exist. We all wanted it to be Mazda with like a hell yeah American vibe, basically.
Yeah.
But they could never drive it home and actually do.
All right, for the last segment, if you will, you each are gonna give each other 3 GM vehicles, and you each get to pick one that you have to drive till the end of your days, till the DMV takes away your driver's license. Which I don't think they actually ever do that. based on the fact that my 92-year-old grandpa still has his. So, James, give Byron 3, and then Byron will return fire.
Okay, your choices are, don't worry, these are great vehicles. The Buick Rendezvous,
Oh, man.
the Saturn Ion sedan, and now I could have had multiple choices here, but ultimately I'm going with the Chevrolet Uplander that you have to drive for the rest of your life.
Oh, this is...
Oh.
I mean, I'm trying to remember how bad the Uplander. It was really bad. It was really bad.
I just had to Google that one too. Yeah, I was like,
Such a yeah. Two of these are mechanically related too.
You know what? Oh no, this is terrible. This is mean. All right, I'm going with the Ion. Believe it or not, I'm actually gonna go. You know what? Because I think that is the least of these three evils. Really, like I mean, it is a relatively modern vehicle. I mean, I drive I daily a 2003 Matrix. Like my standards are low, but I could live with that. I could live with. I couldn't do the Rendezvous. I couldn't, and I couldn't do the Uplander. I love minivans. I genuinely love minivans. I think, as a person who doesn't have any children, I think everyone with children should have a minivan so that you're not letting your kids bang their doors into my car. Anyway, I couldn't sentence myself to it. I couldn't. I'd rather have the Ion. I mean, you could probably find some performance shocks and springs for it and make it less horrible.
The only thing that can make this less horrible is the fact that you now get to give the same question to James and see the pain on. I can see the pain on your face right now when you're talking about trying to find performance springs for an Ion.
Okay, I've got a theme. James and I are both sci-fi fans, so I'm going with an outer space theme here. We're gonna go with 3 Pontiacs that all had sun in their name, or something that means something related to a sun. So your choices are a Pontiac Solstice Coupe NA, so that you don't fit in it. That's important to me. I can't take that top off. Actually, I think they did have like a Targa top, right? So technically you could, but your head would it'd be great. A 2001, I'm giving you a 2001, which is probably like the ideal year for it, Pontiac Sunfire. Or just any Pontiac Sunbird. Now, the thing that the Sunbird, I think, almost feels like I'm being too generous,
Maybe
just because it's
you
interesting.
might be.
But it would have to, this is the car you have to count on every day. I know you have children or a child, so like, remember.
Yeah. So it's hard because I mean the one in the late '80s, that Sunbird, actually for a compact car looked pretty good, but I mean I'm also judging it by looks, and I mean I can only imagine. I've driven I drove the Chevy Cavalier. It was as the driver's ed vehicle, and that was ferocious. So I mean the Sunfire, same thing. So I mean, but that was the successor to the Sunbird. So I guess it was better. And yeah, that Solstice, man, I don't think I left the parking lot in that because I didn't fit in it. The seats were so unbelievably uncomfortable. And then there was just a lot of nonsense in that car. Like the window switches were here. I think it might have been a cup holder, but I could have been wrong. And then the trunk was like this big.
I think they borrowed, at least I want to say that the NC Miata might have also had power window switches that were on the console back there too, and I think GM might have cribbed that from Mazda.
And if you look at the like right here on your head, look how low that goes. I think the the visibility was just atrocious on that. And I have to drive that every day.
Yeah.
Oof.
Oh, but any Pontiac Sunbird.
You can have your choice of Pontiac Sunbird.
Okay, well here I think I found one that works here. This looks like to be from 1977. Here there's a 76 that lovely lady in yellow is wearing, and then the 77, which the woman with the big collar, and that has sporty wheels and has a red stripe on it. I'll go with that. You had a Trojan horse in your selection that you were not aware of, so I'm going to drive that as it looks there, because you did
as it looks. Okay.
Because come on, that survived till now.
45 years old. Yeah. Yikes.
I mean, you might get 3 years out of it before you're rebuilding the thing, so it might as well start fresh. That's only fair.
I mean, I'm sure we could Google as to what the hell this is, but that looks pretty cool. I'll take that. Oh, Formula 77 Pontiac Sunbird Formula.
There you go.
There you go. That sounds great. I'm going to drive that until the end of time. Good God, there was a Sunbird Safari wagon.
Oh my God, we're going to have another hour of James looking up Sunbirds because of this question.
And it was like Pinto, like the Pinto style wagon, like the two-door, like the Illinois Nazis drive in the Blues Brothers. Oh, that's terrible.
Yeah, but again, just consider the what's underneath in most of these cases.
It's the 77, the Formula hatchback. The body style was.
That's a Skylark.
This thing I'm reading here, it was noted for having a resemblance to the Ferrari 365 GTC/4.
Resemblance, sure,
There you go. It had a new standard engine, the Iron Duke. Hey, maybe it was crap in a Camaro, but in a Sunbird. We had a handling package, TA steering wheel. There, this is great.
Some people say I have a resemblance to Chris Hemsworth. So there you go.
I get that too.
Yeah. All right. Well, with that, we'll leave you there. Remember, if you like this content and would like to see more, if any of you are still with us after 7 hours of Sunbird talk, hit that subscribe button below and check out autoblog.com for reviews and news and all other things automotive.